Hello, I'm Michael Penney. I'm a local filmmaker here in Hamilton, and the Factory Media Center has asked me to come in and walk you through the menus of the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro, because I have one of these and I shoot on it all the time and I love it. So I'm going to assume that you've already done all your research and you know all the benefits of this camera. You know, it's fantastic dynamic range, color science, skin tones. It's an incredible tool. So I'm just strictly going to be walking you through the functions and where to find everything on the outside, and also the menu inside the camera. So this is what the LCD looks like when you power it on. Power's up here. I'm going to walk you through first what these all do. So the top corner here is where you're going to find your monitoring tools. You push that and then they all pop up here. So this first one, that's where you're going to find your zebras. You can set them to 75, or you can, set them all the way up to 100 if you want to see if anything's clipping. You turn them on or off here. So you can see there's a hot spot there. Turn that off. Next over we have focus peaking, which I always like to keep on, so you can see it's highlighting things green there when they're in focus. That's what medium sensitivity. You can also switch it to high sensitivity if you're in kind of a lower light situation or you have a softer lens. And then moving along, you've got, this is your aspect ratios. Right now it's set for 16:9, but again, you can use these arrows or you can kind of scroll through here to set it to whatever you like. And by the way, this is just strictly monitoring tools. This doesn't mean that you're recording in 16:9. That's something you have to do in the camera's menu. This is just for monitoring. Moving over, we've got thirds, crosshairs, center dot. So again, switch them on. If you want your crosshairs on, there they are there in the middle. If you want your thirds, if you're doing interviews or have to be consistent with that. There's also a center dot if you prefer that over crosshairs. Moving over. Here we have, this is your safety frame guide. So you can switch that on, see what that looks like. And then finally, this will be your false color here. So if you turn that on, you can see the color assignments for all of your highlights and your lowlights and all that sort of thing. Okay, so next to the monitoring tools here, you have your frames per second. Right now it's set for 24. Again, if you just tap that, you'll have access to different frame rates here. You can go in single increments, or you can just use the slider to, 30 frames, do whatever you want. There we go. And here you have off-speed recording, which, so I see what they shouldn't have had that on. Sorry, that's what was throwing me. Okay, one last time for this section. So right next to monitoring tools, you have frames per second. Again, you can access that just by tapping it. Your project's set to shoot at 24 frames per second. You can go in single increments. You'll see it changing the project here. This will affect your project settings, or you can kind of just go in increments this way. You want to slide. So right now the project's set for 24. What you find over here is your off-speed recording. So this allows you to do like a higher or slower frame rate. You can turn that on. Right now your off-speed recording is set for 24. So let's say you want your off-speed to be 50. So what that does is if you push the HFR, the high frame rate button on the outside of the camera, it'll switch over to 50 frames per second instead. I'll turn that off for now. All right, so next up we have our shutter. You have the option to set it to auto, so for whatever reason decided that a 40-degree shutter would be nice, but I would just leave it off auto. I never use auto. I keep it on 180 if you want to be consistent with that sort of half-pie film look. And if you're more familiar with fractions, you can actually access in your setup through your menu, you can tell it that you want it to display fractions here instead, but it won't allow you to change that here. Iris is disengaged, and the reason is because the lens that we have on here is a Rokinon Cine DS lens, which is a fabulous manual lens. But if you're using a lens, like a Sigma or something, one of their art lenses, you'd actually see the iris pop up here. It would tell you what your iris is at, and you'd be able to tap on that, and you'd be able to change your iris on the screen. But of course, because we're using this manual lens, you have to, if you're going to change your iris, you just have to kind of do it on the lens. I'll also point out that if you are changing the iris on the slider for a lens that has that capability, it does have kind of a clicked effect, so you'll see the stops changing, which may or may not bother you. I prefer manual lenses for this reason, and you can rent these Rokinon Cine DS lenses here at the factory as well. So next up we have time code. Right now it's set for, Next up we have time code. Right now it's set for the clip duration. You can tap it to switch it over to free run or back to record run. Next to the time code, you're going to find your ISO. It's set for 800 now, which is the camera's native ISO. 1600 is great as well. 3200, you might start to see some of that film grain become a little more apparent. It's not like typical gain that you would get on other cameras. It's actually just part of the look at the camera, the film look at the camera. The grain is a very fine grain. And if you were shooting in 4K, for instance, and reducing to HD after, it would be an extremely fine grain. You wouldn't even really notice it. This camera obviously likes light. It is a digital cinema camera. It's not going to compete with things like the Sony by going up to God knows what that goes up to these days. It's not known as a low light camera. However, I have shot this. I have shot with this camera at night, outdoors. I've done time lapses with no light in the sky at all, very few lamps, and it's still a completely usable image. And I've done that at 800, so it works well enough for my purposes. So next up, we have our color temperature. This is where you'll be able to do a white balance. There are preset keys, or there's also this slider where you can slide across and select different Kelvin temperatures. The presets that you have going across from the left to the right, you've got daylight, you've got tungsten, fluorescent, shadow or shade, you've got clouds, and then the next one over is a custom white balance. So if you want to save a white balance, this will just retain whatever it was saved to last. Here's where you'd affect your tint if you want to affect the green and magenta shift. And then right at the end here, this is if you want to do a white balance. You just throw something up there. You can say update white balance, and that's what it's decided the white is for this lighting. So the last thing here, this is your battery icon. You can tap that for a percentage info, or you can kind of see what the meter looks like. Right now we've got full battery. All right, moving on to the bottom of the display. You've got a histogram here, which is amazing. There's nothing to do with tapping it. It's just going to show you, obviously, just another monitoring tool to show you the lighting in your scene. You can press this round touchscreen record icon, and there you go. You're recording when you're finished, and then stop it recording. Here you're going to find the indicators for whatever media you're using, how much time is left, how much record time is left at whatever you've set your project settings to. Right now this project is set for 4K, for instance. So with the amount of storage that's in the media that's available here, there is 31 minutes left. So there's a card 1 slot, a card 2 slot. I'll show you this on the camera body itself, but it takes CFast, SD card, and when you rent this from the Factory Media Center, they actually have an adapter on the back where the battery goes, which records to an SSD drive. So I'll show you that after, but that's actually what that media is set to right now. And of course, if you push it, it'll show you some details on that. It gives you the option to format the card here, and when you do format it, you can choose whether or not you want to do it for Mac or for PC. Okay, so we'll exit out of that. Finally, the last indicator on the LCD, of course, is your audio meters. So right now these channels are separated. They're set for the camera mic because there's no mic hooked up to this camera. So adjust the levels there, and then you're monitoring headphone volume. Let's move on to the menu. So the button for the menu to access it is right there. Right now, let's go to the first tab here. Let me just clean that up. Okay, let's move on in the menu. So to access it, you press the menu button on the camera there. First page of the record menu, you're going to see this. So you get to choose your codec, or basically your look. So right now it's set for film. That'll give you your flattest profile. And then there's a video look, which I don't know why anybody would use. It's kind of like when Blu-rays were still including a DVD copy. It's just terrible. I would never, ever, ever bake in the final look. There's this extended video. So basically what this attempts to do is sort of bridge the two looks. So it gives you kind of like your log profile with your video look. And maybe that's a way you want to deliver it to clients if they're not going to be doing, if they want to edit the footage themselves, or they're not doing, if it's not going through a proper post process where there's going to be some color grading, and you need to deliver footage direct to the client, you might want to just choose that extended video if they don't like the look of film. Let's access the menu through that button there. Now we're into their menu, and this is probably one of the most user-friendly menus you're going to come across out of any camera brand. Blackmagic's kind of known for that. So the first thing you'll see here is you can choose whether or not you want to shoot Blackmagic RAW. It's got all the different flavors of their RAW format. So with ProRes, of course, you go from X2 444, which is lossless. You've got your HQ 422 light proxy. So every time you change one of these things, it will affect how much record time you have left on your media. Obviously, as you go up, there's going to be more data demanded, so you'll have less record time. Recording ProRes 422 is great for most of what I do. If you're going to use Blackmagic RAW, then that could only be edited in DaVinci Resolve right now. I'm sure there are kind of like third-party programs that'll help you convert it to ProRes after the fact, but just save yourself a headache if you're not going to edit on DaVinci Resolve. If you're using Final Cut, Premiere, anything like that, just shoot in ProRes. It's also got Cinema DNG because this camera has not been updated yet. They removed the Cinema DNG option from one of the later firmware versions. So again, ProRes 422 is great. Here, down here, you're going to see, this is where you're going to set your resolution and aspect ratios. So you've got 4.6K here. You've got a 2.4 to 1 here. You've got your 16 by 9 4K, your DCI 4K, Ultra HD, which is, you can look up how big all of these different formats are online easy enough. 3K anamorphic is what you'd use if you're actually using an anamorphic lens or an anamorphic adapter with one of your lenses on this camera. It'll give you like more of that square sensor, and you can de-squeeze that in post. You've got 2K DCI, and HD. So let's move to the next page. You can go backwards or forwards through the pages with these arrows. So on page 2 here, you're going to find, first off, your dynamic range. Right now it's set for film, which gives you the broadest dynamic range. As you know, you can look all these things up, what the difference is between a film look and obviously a video look. I would never shoot anything in video, even if I was handing something off to clients. I don't know what the point would be of having a proper digital cinema camera if you're going to shoot and deliver in video. There's this option for extended video, which will kind of bridge the two a little bit. The only time you'd probably want to use these is if you're shooting something for a client that just wants to take the footage after. They're not going to be grading it in post. They don't know what they're doing, and they would find that sort of flatter profile, film profile, that they don't like that. So maybe in that circumstance, you could kind of split the difference between the two looks with an extended video. But bear in mind that this bakes it into the footage. So if it's a film look, you can grade that however you like in post. You'll have less dynamic range to play with those other formats. Next over, you find your windowed sensor. You can turn that on or turn that off. Best way to understand a window sensor is to think of maybe you're shooting something in HD. So you've got this codec back here, you've got everything you're set for HD here, you're filming. A windowed sensor is going to crop in on the sensor, but it's still going to be a full HD resolution for that crop. So best way to understand that is, let's say you're shooting on a lens and you only have the one lens, and be it a zoom or a fixed, you're already at the end of what you can get, and you want to move in a little closer. Obviously in post you can crop in closer if you're delivering in HD and you've shot it in 4K. You've got a lot of range there to zoom into the footage without losing quality. But if you happen to shoot your project in HD and you know that you're going to need to get closer to your subject and you can't, you can always choose this window sensor mode, which will crop in on the sensor, and you'll still have a full HD read of that closer shot. So it's almost like just adding a zoom lens. So right now it's set for 24 frames per second. You've got your off-speed recording. You can turn on or off. Again, you can set what you want the off-speed speed to be. So let's say you want to go all the way up to, so this thing goes as high as 60 in HD mode. Bear in mind that if you are going to change the mode to 4K, I think it only goes up to 50 frames per second. Right down here, you've got your preferred card. So here's where you assign your preferred card for recording. If you wanted, you can also access this stuff from the LCD screen as you saw earlier, but if you're in the menu, you can change it here. You can put it card 1, SSD, which is the drive here, or you can choose fullest card, so it'll prioritize recording to the fullest card. When it does reach the end of that media, if you have another media format in here, it'll automatically switch over and start recording on that. This final option here is if you wanted to mirror the footage onto two medias, so you record to 2 cards at the same time. It's disengaged because there's only one media format available that's connected to the camera right now, which is the SSD. Moving on to the third page here and final page, there's a time-lapse option. I use this all the time. It's fantastic. If you want to shoot in time-lapse, you can only access this here. When you turn it on, you can tell it here that you want to capture an image, every 5 seconds, if you're doing daytime or something, or if you're capturing something like sunset or sunrise, you want more of the incremental, and you want to capture more of those increments, set it for 1 second, turn it off here. And then the final 3 things here, you've got detail sharpening. You could turn that on if you want, and it's got a default, a medium, or a high setting. I'd never use that. I just like to go with what lens I have on there. I don't know when you'd really use that. Maybe if you had a really soft lens or really low light and not really getting a sharp enough image, you can try that. It's nice to know it's there if you need it. And then here, there's the option to stop recording if a frame is dropped. Let's go ahead and turn that off, because I always like to have that continuous recording. If you have dropped a frame, it'll actually let you know, because this little icon here, the record icon, that's that red circle, you're going to see a caution symbol appear on it, flashing if it's dropped a frame. So it'll tell you anyway, but I like to continue recording so I don't miss any content after the drop frame. Back into the menu, so let's move on now to the monitor. This allows you to change all of the settings that you're going to see through here to assign these things to the LCD, the front SDI of the camera, which you might have something like the viewfinder, Ursa viewfinder connected to. The main SDI, which is on the back of the camera, might be connected to some sort of monitor like an Atomos or something like that, or you can choose all, which tells it that you want to, any settings you want to apply to all of those monitors. I'm not going to walk you through what all these little ones are, because you can, once you have the camera, you can go through it. I mean, you've got your clean feed here. You got the option to display a 3D LUT, turn it off, zebras. These are all the same things that you saw here. When you accessed your monitoring tools, everything that was in here is also available through the monitor menu, and that's what these rows of things are here. Status text, if you want to turn your status text on or off. Turn that back on. You can choose to display meters, which is what is being displayed with the audio meters now, or you can choose to display your codec and resolution. So it's shooting in HD, and your codecs over here, ProRes 422. I always prefer to see my audio meters. And then of course you have screen brightness. And this is why it's important to use things like your histogram to know what your exposure for your shot is, because the last thing you want to do is have a brighter screen and think your shot is brighter and think your shot is too dark. So go by your histogram, or if you have a better monitoring tool than this histogram, because it's very small, I would always recommend using an outboard monitoring system if you've got one available. So here on page 2, you've got your headphone volume, your speaker volume, of course that comes out of the camera itself, options to, for the bad audio or the high pass filter, well, low cut. So we'll move on. So those are the only 2 pages in audio. Next up we have setup. So here's where you're going to find, your language settings, your date and time. This is kind of like the broader setup of the camera. You can tell it that you want to use that shutter angle or shutter speed. That was the right here. You can tell it that basically instead of seeing a shutter angle here, you would rather see those fractions. This is where you would do it. You would set it to shutter speed instead. This is your flicker adjustment, so if you're shooting a TV, that kind of thing, and you're getting some of that flicker, you can try one of these 2. Battery, you can have display the percentage or the voltage, and then ND filters, you can have that info displayed as a stop, as a number, or as a fraction. Moving on. This is where you can name your camera if you want to assign a number to the camera. You would do that if you're shooting with multiple cameras. You've got color bars if you need to send those out. So here on page 2 of the setup menu, you can assign a camera number. That's helpful if you're shooting on multiple cameras. You've got your color bars if you want to send those out. You've also got your headset mic and your program mix. This is all stuff you would use if you're doing some sort of live broadcast. And same with these things along the bottom here. Function buttons. So this is where you get to assign what you want each of your 2 function buttons, which I'll show you on the outside of the camera after this. You can tell them what you want to do. Right now, function 2 is set to display the LUT on the LCD as well as the main SDI out of the back. You know, if you wanted to also send the LUT to the viewfinder, you could do that. So when you hit function 2 on the outside of the camera, that's what it'll do. Function 1 is set for false color right now, but only on the LCD. So it won't force false color out to your exterior monitors. Next page, we've got our status LED. So that's going to be the record LED that you'll see on the outside of the camera here. You could choose to have that low, medium, high, or just turn it off entirely if you want to be a little more stealth. Bear in mind that that won't turn off the exterior status LED on the viewfinder. That has to be done separately through the viewfinder menu.
Okay.
So here on page 4 of the setup, you can choose to have your LED on or off. That's that little red indicator light that tells people you're recording. You can also tell it if you want it to be kind of how bright you want it to be, if you want it low, medium, high. I have a tendency to, I have mine turned off because I like to be a little more stealth sometimes. Bear in mind that if you want the status LED that's on the viewfinder itself to be off, you can only do that through the viewfinder menu. You won't be able to change that here. There is the option to reset the camera settings if you want to go back to factory settings. Maybe that's helpful if you're renting this camera out and things are kind of all over the place from someone who used it last. Maybe just give yourself that fresh start. There's the option to calibrate the sensor. If you're finding that you're getting a little too much grain or noise in your blacks, this might be the place to do it. You can come in and say, I want to calibrate that. Done. So that just sort of resets your blacks. Over here, you've got your camera ID. Pretty self-explanatory. What software version, or firmware version rather, is in here. You've also got the option here on playback to see all the clips laid out as like a preview thing, or you can just do like a single one and just keep moving through them that way. Over here on the last page, there's Bluetooth. There's actually software you can download. There's an app you can download so you can control this camera remotely from your phone. That can be helpful if you're locked off and you don't want to risk kind of knocking the camera by pushing things. So here on the last page, you can choose to turn the Bluetooth on. There's actually an app you can get for, like a smartphone that allows you to control the camera or the basic settings remotely and access the menu and that sort of thing, which can be helpful if you're locked off and you don't want to actually risk kind of nudging your camera while you're going through things. And then, of course, just how to clear that Bluetooth device. Sorry. And then, how to clear the device after. Over here, presets. This is where you'll be able to save a preset. Like if you really like your camera settings or what you've set up for your project, you can create one here. You can also import some presets. So that could be handy. You can have like on a little SD card your favorite camera settings if you're renting this out. You're going to have to send it back and you want to come back to the same settings after. You can always save your settings, export them to the card, pop the card in next time you rent it and bring them back in. You've got LUTs here as well, similar idea. So you've got some preset LUTs that the camera comes with. You've also got the ability to import your own LUTs, and you can also export LUTs from here. So that is your overview of the menu. So I'd call this the user side of the camera because this is where your head goes, and so this is where you're going to find most of the buttons and functions. A lot of this stuff is just going to be hotkeys to access some of those functions that we've already gone over inside the menu. So a lot of this is just repetition. Don't be intimidated by this. Once you start actually looking at it, it's all going to become pretty apparent. So here you've got, we'll start at the top here. You've got an ability to assign this dial here. If you want to adjust your iris, which is what it's set to now, you can kind of scroll through your iris. Once again, if you've got a manual lens like this on there, that won't do anything for you, but if you had an iris with some sort of electronic control features, it would. You can switch it up to monitor for your monitor volume or your headphone volume. Next, you have a menu button. If you push this, you can access your menu. It allows you to see it here through the Ursa viewfinder, and back to get out of that menu. There's also a lock. This is handy if you're shooting and you're worried that your face is going to hit buttons while you're recording. You can lock everything off so that that's not going to happen. Here you're going to find a little dial up and down for your gain, your ISO. Also for your shutter, you can scroll through your shutter settings and your white balance settings. Again, you'll be able to see all this stuff through the viewfinder. You can see how it's affecting the image. Here are those function buttons I mentioned. So, I think this one was set for false color. This is set for a LUT. That's your HFR, is your high frame rate. That's basically your off-speed recording button. So, if we had set this thing for 60 frames per second because we wanted more of that slow motion effect, if you push that, all of a sudden you'll be shooting in slow motion. Push it again to go back to real time. And again, here's an exterior button to trigger recording. Moving across, obviously the on-off button is probably, or switch is probably key to know where that is. Channel selector, again a lock, which will lock the functions on this panel so that you don't trigger anything. Still, it will, if you push that, it's going to take a little still image from whichever point you're recording. That's good if you want to have a little reference photo saved to your media that you can access later. Hold will freeze the time code at that place, so that's a handy tool if you need to mark something and come back and check it out after on playback. Reset will reset the hold. Time code, you can have access here to toggle between free run and record run. Also, brightness is here if you want to light that up so you can see better in the daylight. So here you can take a still image of what you're recording if you wanted to save a reference photo. It doesn't make it a hybrid camera, it's just like a quick one push reference photo that'll save it to your SD card. Hold is if you want to hold the time code at any given point so that you can come back and reference a point after. Reset, if you've done any kind of preset time code, you can reset that. Time code will switch between free run and record run. This is your bright button. If you're in daylight, it makes it easier to see if this is closed. Next up we have iris. That'll trigger an auto iris just for the period of time that you press it in, hold it down. Same with focus. Program, that's going to be if you're doing some sort of live recording. And of course you can skip back and forward or play here to see playback on your viewfinder. And you can also adjust your meters here. So let's open this thing up while we're here. We've already gone over the LCD menu, but I'm going to show you what these buttons are now here. You can assign mic, line, or AES, depending on which format of audio recording you're using. If you need phantom power for your channels, this is where you do that. Make sure if you are recording onto a lav or something like, or a shotgun mic or anything that's already got battery power in it, turn those off, because if you're sending additional power to it, you often get this weird kind of ticking or clicking sound in the audio track. Once again, you can do focus here if you want to check your focus. That'll give you like a focus assist where you punch in. Peaking, that'll turn focus peaking on and off. Those are those green lines that indicate what's in focus. Again, program if you're doing any kind of live broadcast. Your menu button, which I've gone over. Another trigger for record and playback buttons. Here's where you have your SD or CFast format. Tell it which one you want it to use. Finally, there's a USB port here. This is strictly for updating the firmware in the camera. So you can connect that to your computer, download the latest firmware, install it. This is not actually set up to support recording onto an SSD drive. However, here at the Factory Media Center, they have this additional compartment, which they put on the back of the camera, which does in fact record to SSD. So you flip it open and you have your drive right in here. So you can put in your own SSD drive, close that up, and you'll be able to record directly onto that. And then finally at the back you've got a battery. The battery plate here gives you other options as well for for different for a detapped power. On this side of the camera, you have an SDI out. This is a 12G connection. So this is if you needed to send a full 4K signal out of the camera to an exterior monitor recorder like an Atomos, you would send it through here. Not to be confused with the SDI out on the front of the camera, which only sends an HD signal out, which is fine for the viewfinder, for instance. So this port and this is power. This is a 12-volt power thing. So this is what the viewfinder is taking up to receive power and to receive its signal. And then here you're going to find the where you're going to plug in your AC power cable, your 12-volt adapter cable here for powering it through AC power. Under here you have your headphone jack. That's all that there really is on this side of the camera, except this beauty. This is your handle that has a record and a couple monitoring tools up here. And you have the ability, actually, if you wanted to get, it's got an area rosette plate connector, which looks like this. If you want to get some sort of arm, which you'll often see with the shoulder rig, you can relocate this to that just by unscrewing it here. Okay, that's it for that. So this is the front of the camera. This is what it looks like. One thing I'll mention here, there's this little indicator. That's just showing you how far back the sensor is. Okay, so you're going to see a little data connector here. This is if you're using a broadcast lens. That's where you would connect that. Right now we've got one of the lenses you can rent here, the Rokinon Cine DS. These are amazing lenses. You can do a whole other video on this series. They're incredible. And then let me turn this so I can see it. So on this part of the front of the camera, you've got an auto white balance trigger here. And of course, you've got one of the best features of this camera, built-in NDs. And they even have IRE cut filters built in. So you will scroll through these if you're outdoors and you need to change your NDs. There are 3 or 4 filters here. Yeah, 4. And there's, on this side of the camera, I forgot to mention, there's also a little chart that shows you how many stops you're cutting with those NDs. So finally, we're going to move on to the viewfinder here. So I just wanted to show you really quick what's on the top of the camera as well. You've got your XLR ports here. It's a real plug-in for those. Right now mounted, of course, we've got the viewfinder here, and there's a top handle, which is nice. The built-in camera mics are just under here, which you probably won't be able to see from your angle. With the viewfinder, I can show you now how that works, some basics of it. There are 3 buttons here that perform multiple functions. You've got your one-touch zoom if you want to quickly punch in and see what you're getting. You've got focus peaking here, and you've got your display if you want to turn that on and off. You'll also see F1, F2, and F3 because these also performance function buttons. Under here, there is a release to change this, to change the angle. And what's important to know as well is that the other knob over will let you slide this out more. That way, if you have one of those bigger heads like I do, you don't have to be pressed right up against the camera. You can slide this out and it's a little more comfortable for you. And of course, you know, the eye cup could be adjusted and you could go all the way across to your other eye. Diopter. And that is about that. Alright, so you can find a complete list of what you get with this kit when you rent it from the Factory Media Center on their website. I know there was a lot to cover, so thanks for bearing through all of it.